Now up on the screen you can see our presenter for today, Meg Sweeney, and Meg has had a long association with presenting workshops and working with family advocacy for over 2 decades. She has 3 adult children, one of whom has a disability, and Meg has been assisting her daughter to forge her adult life, including getting a job, volunteering, expanding her networks, and moving into a home of her own using self-managed community participation and supported living funding. Good morning and welcome, Meg. Can I please ask, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I live on the south coast, so I'm joining you from Vincentia, and what else can I tell you? Yeah, so Jocelyn lives in her own place and is doing really well. She's just moved on to working 3 days a week instead of 2, and is, yeah, her life is going really well at the moment. Actually, she's the least of our worry out of the 3 children that we have, which is nice for a change. Yeah, and as part of my working roles as well, just for people, I was, you know, some time ago now, but a community visitor with the Community Services Commission before it went over, community visiting went over to the Ombudsman's office. And I visited residential services for people with disabilities, and I really learned a lot about what it was like to live in a service or in a facility. And they were group homes, and a couple of institutions at the time were still operating in my area, and hostels when devolution was occurring. Yeah.
Thanks, Meg, and I will pass back to you shortly. I'll just go through the breakdown of the webinar series. So today's webinar is the second webinar in a 3-part series, and on your screen you can see a breakdown of what each webinar covers. If you joined in last week, you would have heard about what self-direction is and what that means for people's choice and control over their lives. Last week's webinar was the foundation to the whole webinar series, so if you weren't able to join in last week, it was recorded and will be available on our website. We will be sending everybody the link to that. Today's webinar will explain the different ways to self-direct, including working with a service provider or receiving direct payments. It will explore the levels of control people may wish to exercise over their decision-making and support arrangements. It will include discussion around roles and responsibilities between a family and a service provider, how to choose a service provider, and questions to consider asking. Next week is the 3rd and final webinar, which will be looking at developing staff roles according to the particular interests and needs of the person they are assisting. It will cover recruiting, interviewing, and training staff. So as you can see, there is a clear breakdown of what each webinar will focus on.
Okay, we thought it'd be helpful just to do a little bit of a history snapshot of self-direction and how we've come to this point. And the very first consumer-controlled bucket of funding was attendant care. And even though we've got 2008 there, it started well before that, but there was only 100 packages for nearly a decade, and it was for people with physical disability who needed personal care help in order to, you know, get up in the morning and get to work and do their housework and prepare meals and things like that. And then out of that, because that was happening, families and people with disabilities and advocacy organisations were lobbying the government to say people with intellectual disability and people with developmental disability should be able to self-manage or have control of their funding in a similar way. And it was from families that the state government, through ADIC, started the first self-managed community participation program, and that was in 2007. And since then, there's many, many more people that are taking up self-managed community participation instead of the traditional day program model. And attendant care in 2008, they had an assessment around what people gained out of having control of the money themselves, and it was overwhelming that the quality of life of people was far better when they had a say in what, how the resources were used and what they could spend their money on. Now, leading up to 2011, it was actually family advocacy that there was a whole cohort of people who were in school, had gone right through regular school, and whose parents now had aspirations for their sons and daughters to move out of home. Also, there were many parents whose kids, young adults, were now, doing self-managed community participation, and they had aspirations to leave home. So the organisation started talking to both sides of government about quarantining some money to provide funding so people could leave home in a planned way, rather than crisis-driven vacancy management, which had been the way of it occurring before that. And so that what actually led to the Supported Living Fund. So Stronger Together 2 was the second edition of the bipartisan government policy for disability services going into the future, and the Supported Living Fund actually got a Guernsey in that. So again, that came from families and people with disabilities themselves. It wasn't dreamed up by the government as a good idea. And out of that, there were 100 places over each year over 3 years. And unfortunately, that has stopped now. But the model or the fashion of it is what will be coming with the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So if you currently don't have access to any funding, certainly when the NDIS comes in, the sort of conversations we're having in this series will be things you'll be needing to think about. And yeah, so 2013 was the launch of the NDIS, and we're taking it from there, and planning is the key to success with the NDIS. And, we need to remember that the NDIS is not a miracle cure for all of the issues that we face, but it certainly will help people get support for the first time. And then it's what we do with that support that will really make the difference in people's lives. So that's just a bit of the history. Now, just a quick recap, Jess, if you can go to the next slide. Last week we talked about a meaningful week for somebody, and when you're talking to a service or you're going to self-manage, you really need to have done your planning and thought about what it is you're wanting for the person that you love, or having their input into, or assisting and having their input into how their life might look. So this slide people found very helpful because it's all the different aspects of a person's life that you can think about how their participation will be in that. And the next slide, Jess, is this was just an idea of what a meaningful week can look like for somebody. So everyone's life will look different, every single person. So these are available, the PowerPoints as Jess said, and the recording will be available for you to look at. So if you didn't get this or couldn't participate, you can look at it in your own time. But that's really important to start. That's the starting point before you even talk to a service, because that will give you an idea, and just the next slide, as, just before we get there. So I'm going to talk about engaging a service and also direct payments. Next slide. So the majority of people will still engage a service in some way. So the question you need to be asking is, what do you want from a service? Now, in the past, services got the money. And so if you became eligible, you go to a service and say, what do you do? And they'll say X, Y, and Z. And so then you're in the position of either accepting that or having nothing. It was all or nothing. And whereas now that the money comes to the individual, the question will be different. So the question to a service now, you've done your planning, you've done your thinking. The question now is, okay, to the service, this is what we're thinking. How can you help make that happen? So it's a completely different question that you're asking a service. In order to be able to ask that question, you have to actually have a bit of an idea of what it is you're wanting. So if we go to the next slide. So starting with the thinking of a meaningful week, you might not have it all sorted out, but you have a bit of an idea of what the person would like to do with their life, their interests, their passions, the ebb and flow of their day, whether they're an early riser or a night owl, whether they like partying or lots of sport and activity and action. So you've got a bit of an idea of the sort of life that you're wanting. So then you need to have thought about the sort of support arrangements that might be required for that to happen. So if you're closely connected to your culture or your faith, then you might think about the sort of people to provide the support to the person need to be respectful and mindful of that and to fit into that, because that's who the person is. So having a think in your mind already about the type of support or the type of people that you might be wanting to help enact this life that you're thinking of is a really important thing, because that'll lead you to questions to ask the service. Now you're in a position now of choice, so interviewing a number of services is really important. So traditionally we were locked into providers that were just in our local area, and that was really difficult for people in rural areas because generally there was one, and so it was just take it or leave it with that one. Whereas now many organisations operate in a statewide environment, so you can choose a service that may be based in Sydney, but you might live in Moree, and that's okay if that service actually supports what it is you're wanting for your family member, and I'll go into how that works. The important thing too is to find out what the, find a service that actually supports the aspirations that you're having for your family member. So the next slide. Okay, so these are some of the questions that I think are pretty important to be asking. So you've got a bit of an idea of the life. So the question might be, how can you, ABC service, support this vision that we have for our family member's life? And just see what they say. A lot of people now are wanting to choose their own staff or find their own staff. And then, so you have to, if you want to do that, then you need to see what the service's attitude would be to then employing the people that you find. So for many people, that person they find then doesn't become a staff member just in the general pool for the service to use everywhere. They may only work with your family member, but they're employed by the service, so they come under their arrangements for pay and superannuation and all of those sorts of things. So, and tax, so you don't have to worry about doing the, being an employer yourself. So it's really, if that's what you want to do, you need to get that clear right from the start if the service will employ people you find. Now, of course, they'll still have to go through the services checks and balances, have a first aid certificate and a police check and those sorts of things, which is just common sense anyway. The next question is planning. A lot of people have a bit of an idea of what someone would like or they'd like to do with their life, but they haven't got any idea how to go about it. And so you might ask a service, do you help with planning? And if so, how do you do that? And how much will it cost? Because that will be a fee that comes out of the budget that the person has been allocated. And every service does that differently. So it's really important to find that out. And at this point, I'll have to disappoint you all, because if anyone has ever looked for health insurance, I've just gone through the battle of putting solar power onto the house, and it's exactly the same now in the disability field. Comparing apples with apples is really hard. Every service does something different. The way they operate is different. What they charge is different. So you really need to be making notes when you're talking to services so that you can keep an idea of which service is doing what, and try and ask them similar questions so that you're getting the same sort of information from them. So then you can make a decision based on, the overall scheme of things, what makes sense to you. The next question is about the partnership you have. So that goes two ways. Sometimes if things aren't working for you from your end, what's the process of having those things resolved? And as well, what is the process of the service giving feedback to you about how things are going? So you need to know that, because things change all of the time, and so you have to have a process in place. You don't, if something's happening, you don't want emails and a month goes by and nobody gets back to you. Next slide. Okay, so these are important questions too, and services can get a bit uncomfortable with this still because it's new. When they had control of all the money, it didn't matter how much money they spent on administration or how much was spent on each individual person. As long as they were providing the program to the satisfaction of the funders, to ADIC, then it was all okay. Whereas now, it's individual money, it's perfectly fine to be asking a service, how much do you charge for things? So one of the things is about administration. So you need to ask how much they charge for administration and what does that include, because every service will charge something different. Generally, under self-managed programs, it's capped at 12%. But that's negotiable. Sometimes services will charge less than 12% if they don't do as much as other services. So the other thing is just, well, what else do you offer and how much does that cost? How often will your service provide financial statements? Because some people have found that they may only get statements every 6 months, and that is not adequate, because part of self-management is that you need to know how much of your budget is spent, because you might spend less one month and more another month. So if someone becomes very unwell, they might need more support if they're living independently, or they may come, and so then you're using more of your budget, or they may come home while they're unwell and then you need less support, and so you're saving that money to use at another time. So it's very flexible. But unless you know where you stand financially, it's really hard then to know how much money you've got and to sort those things out. So you need to find out when those statements will be provided. Now, one of the other things is the hourly rate that the service charges for support staff. Now, this is a little bit confusing for some people, but it's a really important question to ask, because all staff that are employed by a service are paid under the Shahads Award, and that is it's an Australia-wide award, and the amount of money that it costs, like dollar for dollar for the staff member for their wages, and then for the tax, and then for the superannuation and for insurance, it works out to be between $33 or $35 an hour for a service, or in actual costs. Now, some services charge that out to the budget for maybe $46 an hour. I've come across a service that charges $52 an hour, even though it just costs them $33 to $35 an hour. So the balance of that money goes to the service provider. So in this, new sort of environment we're working in, we need to know how much that's going to cost. Now, you might decide to choose a service provider that charges that at $52 an hour because you think they're exceptional, they're going to provide what you want, you've negotiated other things. That's fine, but you need to know how much it's going to be. And this is a new thing. Services have never had to do this before, to work in an environment that's competitive, and it's perfectly fine for them to be competitive. What else have I got here? Oh yes, the other thing is, if you don't want to find your own staff, you may they may have staff themselves that you want to choose. And then once you find a staff member that your family member really likes, seeing if they'll guarantee that that person will work with the person. Historically, a lot of services got very funny about relationships developing, and if someone ended up with a really good rapport with someone, they'd purposely move them on to someone else because it was deemed unprofessional. Now, all of the people I've met think that that's ridiculous. People at the coalface, families and people with disabilities themselves. Because particularly for people with intellectual disability, with multiple disability and high support needs, they have to have people with them who know them. And you can't know someone without having a relationship with them. And many people take a long time to know. You might have to work with someone for 6 months till you're starting to get an idea of who they are and what they like, and pick up on the nuances of when they're saying yes and no, because it might just be, you know, how a look on their face or a sound that they make. And so it's really important, if that's important to you, to have the same people in somebody's life, and I would suggest to you that it's really important, then making sure, getting some idea from the service whether they would be agreeable to that is really, a really valuable question to ask. Okay, moving on. This is a slide from ADDIC itself. You can find it on the ADDIC website. And this came out sort of a couple of years after self-managed community participation started, which is ADDIC's idea of how, what constitutes an administration cost, which comes out of that 12% that I mentioned, and what contributes something that the service could charge extra for, such as planning or case management. So again, thinking about what it is you're wanting from a service will lead to questions about how much that's going to cost, and then you can compare one service for another about how they go about it and how much they charge for it, because the two things are separate. Okay, so engaging a service, you can choose who you want to work with from a list of accredited providers to provide self-management. Now, that list, there used to be a list actually available on the internet, but it seems to have disappeared. But if you contact your referral and intake of ADDIC, or send them an email through Contact Us, they will send you a list of all of the self-managed providers. So they'll send you the ones that are in your local area, as well as the ones that provide a statewide coverage, so that you can start your interview process with those providers. If you're currently using a service provider and you think, you know, you're wanting to self-manage, so for some of you, you might be in your son or daughter might already have community participation funding, and they may be in a day program or in individual community-based, which is different to self-management, and you might decide, okay, you want to move over to self-management. So the current service you're with, they may also support people under self-managed arrangements, but they may not. Some services only provide day programs or only provide individual community-based. So that doesn't mean you can't move. It means that you just need to talk about moving to self-management, finding out what it's about, and then interviewing services, and then the funding that you currently have will just be moved over to the new service you choose, or within the current service, that the funding that your family member gets will be more individualised. You know, what happens with that money will be more about them.
This is a question that I think it plays around in lots of people's mind, is people like the idea of thinking of self-managing, but they're concerned, you know, that is it easy to do? They might have heard that it's really hard and difficult.
Okay. Look, for most people, most of us, you know, are pretty good at organising our own lives. Like, if we take disability out of the equation, most of us are pretty good. You know, we pay our rent on time, we organise our lives, if we decide to study, we know to go to TAFE or do our research. And so really about self-managing or your family member's life is pretty much the same. You know, we have an idea of how the world works. And so then it's just about organising things around who the person is instead of having a place that they go. So it's about getting a life rather than a program. And that's really a mind shift. And once you start actually doing it, most people find it's not too onerous. At the beginning it is, because you're thinking, you're planning, you're thinking, you're doing things, it's a different way of operating. But once someone's life starts to evolve, it actually just becomes something that you do in a natural way. And the other thing is too about self-management and self-direction is it's not all or nothing. Like when you're engaging a service under self-direction or self-management, you don't have to find your own staff. If you want to use the staff of the service, that's fine. That's just one of the questions you need to ask them. So, how many staff, can I make sure it's the same pool of staff that come, or, and ask, if you don't want to do supervision and training, then that's a question that you have to the service. Will you, who will do the supervision and who will train people? Whereas other families, so some people self-directing still have a lot of input from the service, and that's paid for out of the budget. But then there are other people who really all the service does is hold the money and pay the bills. They just simply pay the wages, a timesheet goes in electronically, they pay the wages, or they pay an invoice. If there's, a gardener or a reading tutor or something like that, or a personal trainer, just provides an invoice and the service just pays it. And then the person and their network or their family, they are the people who find the staff, who train the staff, who supervise the staff, who decide what the person does. And so really there's a whole lot of levels of control in between those two ends, if you like. So don't be nervous about it. It's I think most people who have gone into it and started doing it do find it a little bit tricky at the beginning, but then over time they'd never go back because their family members got a life, and also generally because people are more fulfilled and having a better life, it's better for everybody, because there's stress involved for us when things aren't right in our family member's life. And I think that putting your energy into something that's good and positive is always better than putting your energy into something that's horrible and stressful. And it's the same amount of energy, but much better outcomes.
Okay, Meg, so we've got a lot of questions now. So one, we just need to confirm there. We're being asked there, can you please confirm that we're talking about me, I assume me, the parent, self-managing the funds, or is it a third party managing the funds for me? Perhaps you can just spell that out again for us, Meg.
Sure. Well, with self-management, it's either the person with the disability or their family or a significant other person in their life who is doing the self-management. So that the onus of what happens stays with the person and with their circle or their network or their family. So you're the one making the decisions. But in that decision making, you can nominate a service. So you can choose a service, and they will charge you for administration, as I've said, but they also will charge out for other things you may want. So you're still in the driver's seat of what happens, but a service can help you make that happen. Yeah, okay. If that happens, you can just go back to more traditional types of support with services. And again, it's the same sort of process. You just interview services, find out what they're offering, and then you choose something that you think will be, that will suit you. So if you're finding, if you go down this pathway and it's not working out, it doesn't mean you'll lose your funding or, something terrible will happen. It's just a matter of negotiating with services that you want to go to back to a more traditional sort of way of doing things. And some people can move, it's not, I wouldn't recommend, it's not going to work if, for 8 months or for, 2 months you do it yourself and 2 months you go back to, traditional sort of way of doing things and 2 months you want to self-manage. That won't work. you have to sort of give it a pretty good go, 6 months or longer. It'll take 6 months at least to really get into the swing of things anyway. And then maybe if things aren't working so well, you have a conversation with the service that's administering the money or that you're dealing with and say, look, you know, we need more help. It doesn't seem to be working so well. And services, you know, depending on which service you choose, many of them are really keen for this to work for people. They can see the benefits so that then they can help you get things better. So if the issues are with staff or if the issues are with, you know, there's been a breakdown between the person and staff members and how you handle that, or whatever the issue might be. Yeah, so you can choose between programs, but it's not something you'd want to do just randomly. You have to sort of plan it and know why you're doing it.
Okay, so someone here's asking, you know, if things self-managing is a little bit confusing in the process, is there, who are the sorts of people or what sort of professional help might there be out there to assist families to get started?
Okay, I'll just, on the ADDIC website, there is a booklet called, it's about self-management, My Life, My Way, I think, is that right? Is that what it's called, ladies in the office?
Yeah, Living Life My Way, something like that.
Living Life My Way. So that's a good place to start. If you get it, you can just download a PDF and read that because it explains self-management really well. And then as far as who can help you, well, services can help, but also there are people popping up now that are individual contractors that can help with planning. So out of that, the bucket of funding, you can pay an independent planner, someone that's outside of the service system, that can help you think about what you might do, how that could happen, give you some ideas, and even help you know the sort of questions you might be asking the service or dealing with the service about. And at the moment, you know, who those people are, it's because it's new, there's not like a register or anything like that, but if you ask around in your local area, ask maybe your local ADDIC office, ask service providers if they know people who do planning, then they'll put you in touch with people. And it can get paid for out of the bucket of funding.
Okay, thanks, Meg. There's just a few questions that we might address later or we can. Someone's asked around self-managing the transition to work program and that has different outcomes that particular funding has. Perhaps that's something that that person might like to follow up with Resourcing Families later. Send us an email like that or give us a call and we'd be more than happy to talk around your situation through with that. Someone's mentioned, you know, does the Hunter region, the NDIS there, maybe they would have a list of accredited service providers. Yes, that would be true. They would have people that are now accredited to be providing services and support for that particular launch region. Someone's asked a question around the award rates, and we're going to send a link to the SHADS award that Meg mentioned, which is the Community Services Award that around, and you'll have links to that so you can look a bit more into that area of award rates. And I think that's our questions for now. Someone has commented that, you know, across the regions there are discrepancies around direct costs and what people are paying in admin, and that's certainly true. And the whole point, I think, of the NDIS being a national system was that sort of differences and the discrepancies around the country and around the state even were to be, you know, finished through there being, you know, these things clear for everybody.
Some people choose to do a lot of things themselves and other people really want a service to do most of the things, but they just want to be able to be sure that the service is doing what they want rather than the service dictating what will happen. So it's important to come up with what you want to do and what you'd like the service to do, because this will lead in, and I'll explain why it's important. So this just gives you an idea. So you might want to find your own staff, or you may want the service to do that. So it's just an easy tick the box sort of a thing. so that you can be clear on the conversation you're having with the service about who's doing what. Now the next slide. So once you decide who's doing what, it's really important to get this in writing. And it's important for both parties, for you, for the family and the person, and also for the service. Because if it's in writing, then it's clear that if one party has said that they'll do all of these things and they're not, then a conversation can be held about that, whether that's the family or the service. Because some of the families have great ideas, we're going to do everything, and then we get busy, or you know, your mother breaks a hip and you're called away for 3 months, and so you fall down in what you said that you will do. And so to safeguard the person, because we don't want their life to, you know, go on hold, then a conversation will be had with the service. Look, I said I'd do that, but I really don't have the capacity to do that at the moment. Will you do that on, you know, and then that will be charged for out of the funding. So it's negotiation all of the time, but you've got to be clear about who's doing what, so stuff actually gets done. Now the other thing about it is that very often good things happen because there's a good person in a role. So you'll be talking to the representative of the service, and you say, will you hire the staff that I find? They say, yep, no problem. Unless you've got that in writing, that person then gets married, moves interstate, gets a promotion, you get a new person in the role and they say, oh no, we don't do that. And you've got no opportunity then to, you know, what they say is what happens. So if you have it in writing, then you've got at that point of negotiation with the new person to say, well, we've always done it this way and it's really been effective. So and make them justify why it can't happen rather than you justifying why it should. So that's just about service agreements. Unfortunately, when transition to work you know, came about, self-management was not an option. It was a program provided by a service. So you still could choose which program, which service you wanted, but then the service said, this is what we do, this is what happens in our program. It's my understanding, though, in travelling around, some people are, like the department, ADIC, we're talking about giving, bringing in self-managed transition to work, similar to self-managed community participation. I'm not, you know, sure. I haven't seen a press release that says that that is available. But travelling around the state, it appears that some people are self-managing their transition to work. So I'm not quite sure of the status. Again, it might be a good person in the service that's just saying, yeah, that's fine, show us your plan, yep, that's great, you know, get on with it. But you may, in your discussions with services, see how much, you know, whether you can self-manage. And I think the other thing is too, I mean, self-management is a structure. But under transition to work, there's no reason why. All of the guidelines for programs mention things like person-centred, in the community, about the person, transition to work with a vocational focus, on real work, those sorts of things. So there's no reason why you can't, if what you think the service is offering is, you know, not leading anywhere or of no interest to the person in your family, I think it's perfectly fine to have a negotiation with them to get something different happening. There's no reason why that one person can't be out doing their own thing instead of being part of a group activity, if you like. So there's several ways you can go about it. You can talk to your service about more control about what they're currently offering, more choice. You can talk to the service about whether you can self-manage if you're currently in one, or you can ring other services in your area who provide transition to work and talk to them about the possibility of self-management. And you can also talk to your local ADIC office to see what the status of, you know, self-management is.
Meg, we have a question here. Someone's asking, well, how do families find out what is out there to be able to help them?
Okay. Well, when you become eligible for some funding, so we've been talking a bit about community participation and transition to work. When young people leave school, they go through an assessment process. They end up in one program or another, and then you get information, huge booklets of information comes out about what you can then do with that funding. So that's really the start about the information that's out there. And then it comes to, ringing services, working out some ideas about what you want for your family member, what you think they'd like to do, because you know them, and then interviewing the services as I've outlined. And, there's no, I'd like to say there's a one-stop shop, but there's just not. And there's a reason for that, because we actually all want something different. Everyone's life is different. And every service that's out there will appeal to different people for different reasons. And so really it's about finding the one that fits best with your family member and the culture really of your family as well. So this is just about, if you want to engage a service, if you don't want to have direct payments and have total control of things, then it is a relationship with the service that you're talking about. So direct payments came in about the beginning of last year. The letters went out. There are some funding buckets at the moment that you can apply for direct payments. So if you're unsure of that, just contact your local ADIC office. With direct payments, the idea is that you on behalf of your son or daughter, because the people that I'm talking about, people with physical disability, acquired injury, many people can manage stuff on their own. But the people that I'm interested in talking about can't. They're people with intellectual disability, multiple disability, who may not speak, who have communication, issues of one sort or another, and they need somebody else to do it on their behalf, and always will. And so family members now are indicating that they don't want to deal with services. They find it, they're not value adding to anything. They're happy to do it themselves. And so that's where direct payments have come in. So the funds then come straight into a bank account in the person's name. They come on a monthly basis at this point in time. You then, on behalf of your son or daughter or with their assistance, are totally responsible for the planning and for the budgeting and for reporting, which at the moment is monthly, managing all the accounts and payments, and communicating and reporting directly to the funder. At the moment, the reporting is on a monthly basis. It's quite straightforward. There's an Excel spreadsheet that it's linked to the plan that you had about, whether it's support staff or resources or costs of running a car, costs for a holiday. They're all outlaid and what you've said it'll cost in the 12 months, and you just fill in what you spent that month on that particular line item. So I'm not an accountant. We actually currently get direct payments now, and I'm not an accountant, and I find it really easy, and I hate Excel. So if I can do it, I can guarantee anyone can pick it up with a bit of, perseverance. And then so you just fill that in and send it off to the ADIC link to the direct payment people once a month. So this is just a bit of an idea. It's a bit of a, convoluted slide, but this is off the website as well. This is just the flow chart for direct payments. They've got a handbook, a direct payment handbook, that's available on the ADIC website. So you can read that first to understand everything about receiving, like the responsibilities involved in direct payments. Then you can show interest by registering. And then you have to develop a plan, and most people have already got a plan anyway, so you might need to just tweak that around a little bit. They'll do an assessment, a risk assessment I suppose, to see that they feel that you have the capacity to manage this on behalf of your family member. And then the money goes into the bank account and it all gets going from there. Okay, so just before I talk about that, so gaining, I've just brushed over direct payments because really that is a whole workshop in itself. We're just starting, as I said, it only started, the first people receiving direct payments probably would have been the middle of last year, so it's not even 12 months that it's been in, or just 12 months. And many of us are learning as we go, and so the way some people are setting things up is that they are actually becoming the employer, so it's like running a small business. So you have to be mindful of superannuation and insurances and taxation on behalf of the staff that you're hiring. Other people are choosing to, when they find staff or the right people, then they are employed as contractors. So the person has their own ADN and they provide an invoice and you pay the invoice. But the person themselves is responsible for their superannuation and insurances and things like that. And of course then the hourly rate will be negotiated because it would be more than the award. And then other people are choosing to get direct payments but still use staff from a service, but the service just provides an invoice and they pay it. So it's a bit like brokerage. So there are many different ways people are using the direct payments, and I think, you know, it's a bit of a watch this space. So I know Resourcing Families is talking about doing something in the future to share the ideas and experience that people are having with direct payments because it is so new. But moving on, regardless of whether you're using a service or receiving direct or having direct payments and employing staff or using contractors, support is more than just paid staff. I don't think, you know, just working out the role of a traditional disability support worker glued to the person for absolutely everything is really starting to fade, and the support is being more tailored to the actual role the person's in. So in that example I had of the Meaningful Week, that was a young woman who was moving out of home or wanted to move out of home, and one of the major issues for the family was her being able to wash her hair. She had long, thick hair and she wasn't very good at managing it herself. So rather than getting a disability support worker to come in and help wash her hair, they found a hairdresser when they were looking for a unit for her to rent. She lives in the city. They found one that was, you know, they were mindful about having one within walking distance, having a hairdresser within walking distance, and then they built up a rapport with the hairdressing salon, and so she goes 3 times a week just to have her hair shampooed, just as anyone ordinarily would. But that's paid for out of her supported living fund budget because she needs to have that done on her behalf. If you want to join a community association or a club, some people are paying the membership of a companion to go with them. So rather than paying wages to someone, it's just an in-kind, like I'll pay for your Zumba class if you pick me up and drop me home, that sort of thing. If you want to go on a holiday, you can use your funding to pay for a companion to travel with you. Some people do get wages or pay wages for a companion to go on a holiday with people, but many people have someone in their life that would be happy to go on a holiday with them time-wise, but they just aren't financial enough or don't want to spend their money on the sort of holiday the person with the disability wants to have. So you can use your funding to provide, you know, the ticket for a cruise or the ticket for a package deal to a, you know, Fiji or somewhere, for the companion to go with the person to provide the support they need for the holiday. Transport to a local club, for instance, is courtesy buses, things like that. So it's about thinking outside the square a bit with self-direction about how, you know, what are the way I think about it is what are the ordinary ways people go about their life? Okay, well, what sort of extra structure or support or scaffolding needs to happen for the person to do that, rather than thinking you need specialist disability separate stuff. That's looking at what the typical is and thinking how can the person then access the typical, and that might be with support or a person or thinking about it differently. Okay, So the different types of support, this has come from My Choice Matters. Support to move, help move home, try new things, to get a job or start a business or get some vocational skills, support to learn new things and study roles, support to work out what is needed, because sometimes, you know, like that thing about, well, where do I know where to start? And support to help meet new people. And a lot of people really, that's a critical thing that I find with the people that I'm interested in seeing have a good life, is that they're not very good at forming relationships. And so having staff, and it's different to just a disability support worker where their role is to provide practical things, you know, helping someone eat or change or go do the shopping. It's around having people that are like a bridge in a relationship to other people. So when you're going to a club or a sporting, a member of a sporting association or wherever you happen to be, the person's role is to introduce the person to other people and start a conversation happening, and then withdrawing or providing the assistance as needed. So it's not about them being the friend, it's about them facilitating the people in their own community to get known and to be known and to develop relationships. Okay, so I think the next slide's around questions.
Yeah, Meg, we have a question here. Someone was given information that if they went to direct payments, there were less things they would be able to do or purchase than if they stayed within their community participation program. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. Well, I just think that that's really interesting. And I'd be wondering who's saying that, if that's the service saying that or whether that's the department saying that. So, yeah, I think that just needs more questions about it, that personal. Because one of the things, you know, we have to be aware that services aren't evil. I don't want to give people that impression. Services are necessary, and but what's happening now is the relationship, hopefully the relationship we have with services will be different. So many services started out as grassroots organisations set up by parents who kept their children home from institutions. And they did really good things. They started their own schools, they started their own day things, and over time they've just become these huge, many of them, huge industries. They call themselves an industry. And really I think in many services the focus has gone off, you know, what provides a good life for someone, and it's more about maintaining the service's reputation or the service's, you know, status in the community or the staff conditions or all of those sorts of things. And so many people's lives have sort of been forgotten. Whereas now with this this new frame, we've got a chance for services to refocus really their attention on the lives of people. And it's very threatening for many services that this is happening. And certainly direct payments, you know, for many people, a lot of people move to direct payments, some services will be obsolete. They won't be needed anymore for some people. And so that's threatening to services. I'm not surprised if some services, when you talk about, you know, maybe we'll move to direct payments, will try and talk you out of it for all sorts of reasons, but self-interest is definitely one of them. But in the bigger scheme of things, I don't want people to get frightened thinking that the whole service system is going to collapse, because it absolutely won't. It will not. In my and other people's estimate, probably the amount of people that will go to direct payments where they have total control probably won't be much more than 10%. The majority of people will still engage a service, have a relationship with a service, but the negotiation of what the service does is the important part there. So the family and the person still maintains the decision making about what the person does, when they do it, who does the support, and you know how that all plays out. And that's the relationship being different is the most important thing about self-direction.
Yeah. So there has been some discussion in the chat space, Meg, around the administration cost, and one person asked, well, if the service provider is being only a financial intermediary, I can't even say that at this point, if they're only just looking at brokering finances and things like that, what would that percentage be? And someone said that they'd managed to negotiate theirs down to 8%. Would you like to explain more about that?
Yeah, sure. And it is absolutely negotiable. Like the amount it's in the guidelines is up to 12%. So it's capped at 12%. But it can be negotiated down. Now, I know some services who are charging 5%. Because all they do, you know, they're remote, they may be based in Sydney, all they do is pay the bills. The family finds the staff, as I said, you know, they might be in the far west, they find the staff, they organise, they do the training, they do everything. And all the service does is pay the bills. So anywhere, I haven't seen anything lower than that, but 5 or 6% and then anything between there and 12%. But if you, I know what services are doing now, though, if you want help with planning, then you will pay extra for that. Those ones that you're negotiating the admin fee down, it's just if they're in the role of simply paying the accounts. It's all they do.
Okay, so we're just looking through some more of the questions and to see if there are any more there. And
sure, I can see people are asking, like, who charges 5%, and I don't want to endorse any particular organisation, but I just encourage people to, even if you live in Sydney, to ring some of the organisations that provide a statewide coverage, because they seem to be the ones that you know, where you do the majority of things, and they simply hold the money and pay the bills. That's all they do. So some of those statewide organisations, and it's a simple conversation. You can just ring them up and say, how much do you charge for administration for self-management? It shouldn't be a long, convoluted conversation. They should just be able to say 8%, 12%, or, and then is it negotiable? Yes or no. It's, you know, so you might be able to, you know, work it out pretty quickly. But you've got to understand as well, though, that's just one aspect.
Okay.
If you've got a really good relationship with your provider and they're doing a good job and everything is working well, and that they charge 12%, is it worth risking going to somebody else to save that 4% to spend somewhere else? See, it's not just about the money, it's also about the quality of what's happening in someone's life and the quality of the relationship you have with the service. That has value too.
So someone's asked around when they've decided what they want to use their funds for.
Yes, everything you use the money on has to be reflected in the plan. So when you first get the funding, you need to have a plan on how you propose to use that funding, and then each of those things has to have a cost attached to it. That, you know, it's an estimate about how much that might be. So if it's, you know, support hours for a person, you work out how many hours per week that will be and have a cost attached to it. And so then when you are recruiting, like what you're doing is reflected, everything you're doing is reflected in that plan that you've done. So if a holiday, for instance, like for our daughter, we allow $2,000 per annum for a companion to have a holiday. And that might be a cruise or an overseas trip or something like that, but we put that in, or it may be 2 different holidays for $1,000 a piece and more local, close to home. But we allow $2,000, and so then we have to have that reflected in the budget of how that money is spent. So it's not like you can't just sort of on a whim decide, oh, you know, it'd be nice to go to, you know, Tanzania for 5 weeks and, you know, spend half your year's funding on doing that. That's not the sort of way it goes. And, you know, people are saying that's what people will do, but in my experience, families, people with disabilities are very frugal with the money. Everything that you spend is really well thought about and for the benefit of the person in everyday life. You know, I don't think we're spendthrifts at all. not only if they're getting wages, if they're being paid wages, then of course they're either a staff member or a contractor. But if the companion's just going in a freely given way, so that might be a friend, a brother or a sister or an aunt, or, you know, a neighbour that knows them really well, someone they've met at the gym that they hit it off and they're a friend, a person in their life now, then they're not getting wages. It simply pays for their part of the holiday so that they can go at no cost to them.
Okay, someone just made comment about direct payment guidelines and community participation guidelines being different, and yes, they are. And we will have links to those separate guidelines and handbooks around those two programs in the follow-up email. Someone also commented mentioned again, you know, what's this SHADS award we're talking about? It is the Community Services Award that people who work in community services, so it's the award that I'm paid by, but it's also the award that support workers would be paid by. And look, we'll go into much more detail about that or spell that out a bit more in the next webinar, which is around employing staff. But again, there will be a link in our follow-up email. So this is our last opportunity to be asking questions before we close the webinar. So I see people typing now. So if you really want to quickly get in those final questions. If you felt that we didn't get to answer your question today, and look, it's just impossible to answer them to all of them in this short space of time, and some of them are specific to your situation, please email this question to us. Jess is going to come back on shortly and give you some more follow-up information, and we'd be happy to get back to you on that one. Someone's asking here, if you wish to go to direct payment,
well, that's an interesting question. I believe they're getting quicker now, but in our experience it took 8 months. And I've been told by the office in Sydney that was the longest that they'd come across. But I think that was due to changes within offices, you know, people acting up and going on holidays and all of that sort of stuff, so it sort of fell in a black hole. You know, people acting up and going on holidays and all of that sort of stuff, so it sort of fell in a black hole somewhere. But I have come across someone who said it was 4 months from beginning to when the first lot of money turned up in their bank account. Yeah. And the other thing too, if you move to direct payments, it's important that the service that you're currently dealing with, we have negotiated, we got final statements from that service, and I provided a copy of the letter approving direct payments on our daughter's behalf to the service, and gave them her account details, and they transferred the balance of the funds they were holding of her funding into her direct payment account. So the balance of her money didn't stay with the service, it went into her direct payment account.
Meg, someone's commented here that they're going through the NDIS process, but it appears that they should have, you need a detailed plan, and what's very, very important is winning over the planner to...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see, again, that's everyone is having a different experience, because, you know, people can't be, what's the word? We can't standardise people. People are different, and so for some planners, they may have come from a very traditional type of a disability background, or a therapy background, or something, or psychology background. And so for people coming in, or families coming in saying, you know, coming up with ideas about an ordinary life, an ordinary community and things like that, it's a real challenge for them. They can't see it, particularly if the person has high support needs, because they themselves are sort of institutionalised in their thinking. So whereas other planners are just, you know, you come up with your vision and your plan, and they're fabulous from what I hear about making that fit the guidelines. Very creative. So I think having your ideas and your plan first and coming from you is really the foundation. And you need to have thought about why those things are important to the person, because you will have to probably justify it. So, for instance, our daughter, we haven't been through the NDIS arrangements yet. I don't think we'll probably get there till the very end. But for instance, with community the supported living fund money, we got knocked back. We wanted to charge. Jocelyn owns her own car. She bought it herself out of the pension that we'd saved. And so we put into the plan the running costs for her car, the insurance, fuel, repairs and maintenance. And that got knocked back. They said, no, you can't do that. And so I justified it by saying, okay, then we pay a support worker 78 cents a kilometre for their use of their private car to take her, because we live, 30 kilometres out of town, to, go shopping and to do the things she needs. This is how much it will cost per annum for that to happen, per year. And actually, if you pay for the fuel and the running costs, it will save $2,000 out of the budget. And so once I justified it that way, they said, fair enough, okay, we get that. So you have to have a little think about why that's important and how it's cost effective. And then generally you get a bit further with your planners rather than just saying because I want it. Yeah.
Okay, this might be the last question, but I'm going to read it out to you, Meg, because it's involved here. But it says, the question is, will we still be able to do the same things under the NDIS? My service provider says the majority of things my daughter is doing now under self-managed won't be under the NDIS. They tried to make me change my plan now, and I reminded them that we're funded for CPP, self-managed, and not changing to the NDIS until it comes in. I think some providers are nervous about losing current clients, so are painting a bad picture to entice you to remain with them.
Yes, I agree. And I also agree that I would really question changing anything about your plan in relation to the NDIS until the NDIS comes to your area. It might be 3 years. It could even be longer. Like they're talking about, rolling it out by, what is it, 2018 or something. But with the progress we've seen, I highly doubt that that's going to happen, unless they really get a crack on. So I would encourage you, if things are working well under self-managed community participation at the moment, just keep with it. And just be as stubborn as they are. If they say, we really want you to change, we say, well, thank you for that advice, but no, we're happy with how things are. And just keep, and if it becomes really acrimonious with the service, you may need to choose another service if they, if they become really belligerent about things, but I doubt they will. It's just a matter of saying, oh, thanks for that, but we'll just keep going the way we are. Thank you.
Just one final comment there. Was someone asked about the hairdresser you referred to before and whether they needed a tax file number. But of course, Meg, that would be just a service that you would pay like anything else we do in our lives, and you would just need a receipt just to account for that in your plan.
That's right. That's right. You just need a receipt. Or the other thing is, because the money goes into a bank account, one of the things that I find easy to manage is, rather than using cash, is to just use FPOS, because she goes 3 times a week to the same hairdresser. Then when you have your bank statement, it'll have the business trading name for that purchase on your statement. So it's a good reminder for you that you spent the money there when you're doing your your reporting at the end of the time, and you don't need to keep receipts. That's your receipt. The bank statement is your receipt. And then you don't have to worry about the person having cash, which for a lot of people is a major issue. Whereas if they just pay with their pay wave or whatever, then it's solved. They don't have to worry about the money, and it comes up on the statement what that purchase was. The same for fuel, or for and if you're paying an invoice, you get a little text box that tells you what that invoice is for, like what that payment is for if you're doing a direct transfer. So you just put in, someone's wages. So that's your reporting right there. It's not onerous.
Someone just commented about direct payments. So if you're doing direct payments and everything yourself, how do the things that you're doing there get approved? Because you don't have necessarily a planner.
Yes, so ADIC approve it. So you have to do your plan, and then the direct payment people at ADIC, they are the ones you deal with in relation to having the plan approved.
Okay. So we're going to leave the...
I think, can I just comment on one question, one of the things, and that is, I saw someone saying about hairdressers and things like that. At the moment, under the NDIS, it'll be a little different. But at the moment, your plan or what the money is spent on has to reflect the bucket of money that you're using, unfortunately. So if it's community participation funding, then it has to be, what you're using has to be reflective of how that helps the person participate in the community. So you just need to be mindful of that's the lens they're sort of looking through. But if we move on, because we're nearly out of time.
If you are interested in registering your interest for individualised funding, there's the contact number for Ageing, Disability and Home Care, or the email address for Living Life My Way. Don't worry if you can't jot that down now, because again that will come up in the follow-up email. So here's our contact details. Now our survey will appear on the screen shortly, and we would really appreciate your feedback about the webinar and the few minutes of course that it would take for you to complete. But I really just want to say thank you, Meg, for sharing all of your information and knowledge with us today. And of course, thank you to all the webinar participants out there for taking part. Again, we do encourage you to contact us if you'd like to ask us some more questions. And we hope that we see you at our webinar next week. Until then, thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meg.